"Sir, can I slip under your coat?" The young girl whispered. The silent rancher froze in shock. New Mexico Territory, spring of 1873. The desert stretched for miles, hot, endless, and unforgiving. A freight train carved its path across the sun-cracked land, its iron wheels rattling like bones on the edge of the world. Inside the last passenger car, the air was dry, still, heavy with dust and resignation. Most of the men inside sat slumped in silence, hats low, boots dirty, eyes dull with the wear of living too long in a land that offered too little. At the very end of the car sat a man alone, broad-shouldered, towering, quiet. Silas Boone. He wore a long tan duster coat, faded at the edges, but strong. It draped over his frame like a cloak built to weather dust storms and bullets alike. His hat shaded a square, sun-worn face. His eyes, cold and unmoving, stared out the window at nothing in particular. He looked like a man who had stopped expecting things a long time ago. He had not spoken since boarding, nor had anyone tried to speak to him. Then the door at the far end opened with a metallic groan. A girl stepped in. Young, barely 18, with wind-tossed hair and dirt streaking her cheeks. Her dress hung loose and ripped, too thin for the desert wind. Her boots were too big, obviously not hers, laces dragging across the splintered floor. She was breathing fast, glancing back over her shoulder every few steps. Her eyes searched the car, wild and desperate, landing on the quiet man in the back. She moved toward him, clutching a canvas satchel to her chest like a lifeline. When she reached his bench, she stopped. "Sir," she said, barely audible. Her voice cracked with the dryness of fear. "May I slip under your coat?" Silas didn't look at her, not at first. Then slowly, he turned his head. His eyes met hers. They were wide and red-rimmed, but not dull, not empty. There was still a flicker of fight in them, buried beneath the dust and dread. "Please," she whispered again, "do not let them take me." Silas blinked once, his jaw tightened. Then, in one quiet motion, he shifted his broad frame and lifted the edge of his coat. She slid in beside him, shaking. Her body curled in under the heavy fabric. Her shoulder brushed his ribs. He said nothing. Her breathing slowed just enough to match the rhythm of the train. Her eyes closed. Her satchel rested in her lap. Her hands trembled. Silas kept staring forward, his expression unchanged. The train swayed gently on the rails. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the buttes, casting golden light through the dusty glass. Then, the faint sound of boots, several pairs, heavy, purposeful, growing louder, drawing near. Somewhere down the corridor of the train car, a door slammed open, and footsteps echoed closer. The footsteps drew closer, boots clapped against wood, hard, heavy, hurried. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She pressed tighter into Silas's side, buried beneath his coat like a fox hiding from hounds. Her whisper came out broken. "Please, don't let them take me. I'm begging you." Silas didn't answer, but he shifted. Just slightly, enough to lean in, his wide coat folding in closer around her. He didn't look at her. He didn't ask a single question. But the motion said what no words could. "You're under my shadow now." The door creaked. The boots entered. 3 men, one tall and sunburned, another thick-shouldered with gambler's rings on every finger. The third had a scar like a knife mark splitting his chin. They moved slowly, scanning faces, eyes hard, hungry. One sniffed the air like a bloodhound. Ellie's fingernails dug into her satchel. Her body trembled, her mouth pressed shut to keep from whimpering. One man turned, looked directly toward the back row. Straight at Silas. His gaze lingered. Silas stared back, unmoving, his expression carved in stone. No flicker, no fear. The man blinked, uncertain, then turned away. They moved on. The tension in Ellie's chest loosened, just slightly, until the train jolted. A gust of desert wind hit the windows, and with it came a voice from outside, muffled but sharp. "She's on this train, keep looking." One of the men doubled back, his hand reached toward the back bench. Silas moved first. Without warning he stood, his frame towering, coat flaring like a storm cloud, and gripped Ellie's wrist. "Hold tight," he said. He yanked her up and bolted toward the back of the car. The last door, the emergency hatch. "What the— Hey!" one of the men shouted. Silas kicked the latch. The door burst open, wind howling through the narrow gap. Ellie gasped. Her boots skidded on the threshold. "Jump," he said. Before she could scream, he jumped first, pulling her with him. They hit the earth hard, tumbling into sand and dry brush. The world spun. Ellie felt the skin tear on her elbow. Stones bit into her knee. Silas rolled to his feet and pulled her up without a word. The train thundered away behind them, wheels screaming into the horizon. Then came the shouts. They jumped. Over the ridge. Silas took Ellie's hand and ran. They moved through brittle weeds and sharp stone, uphill toward a dry ravine. The sun had dipped lower, casting long streaks of firelight across the land. Ellie tripped. Silas didn't stop. He just reached back, yanked her upright, and kept going. They reached the edge of a low canyon, and Silas yanked her behind a ridge of jagged red rock. He crouched, pulled a knife from his boot, and slashed a length of rope from his belt. Then he grabbed a fistful of dry grass, twisting it with sharp, practiced fingers. "What are you doing?" Ellie gasped, crouching beside him. He didn't look up. "Making smoke." He tied the rope to a scrub branch, lit the grass with his flint, and shoved it beneath a pile of dry brush. Smoke rose fast, white and thick, curling around the rocks like desert mist. "Back this way." He pulled her low through the brush, weaving around boulders until they dropped into a narrow, dry creek bed. Behind them, voices cursed, coughed, confused. "The hell's that smoke?" "Which way'd they go?" Ellie followed blindly, lungs burning. Her legs screamed for rest, but she didn't dare stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, the shouting faded. Silas slowed. The world was quiet again, just wind, dusk, and the soft sound of her ragged breath. She collapsed to her knees. "I can't." "You can." He looked down at her, not unkindly. Then he offered a hand. She took it. They walked again, slower now, over one more ridge, through one last stretch of stubborn sage. And then, light. A single lantern flickered from the porch of a crooked house nestled in a shallow valley. The fences were bent, but standing. The barn had holes, but the roof held. Chickens wandered in the yard. A rusted bell hung from a post. Ellie blinked. "Is this?" Silas nodded. "My place." He led her across the yard, past a limping goat, toward the front steps. "You'll be safe here," he said simply. Then he opened the door. The morning arrived with a hush. Sunlight dripped through the branches of the old oak by the porch, casting a net of golden light across the yard. The wind stirred slowly, warm against the weathered wood of the ranch house. Ellie stepped outside barefoot, the hem of her dress brushing over the earth. The air smelled of hay, eggshell, and morning stillness. She didn't know if she was supposed to help, but her hands needed something to do. She started with the porch, sweeping dust and leaves into a quiet pile, then to the edge of the barn, where she stacked kindling without being asked. Her fingers moved by instinct, her eyes scanning everything as if trying to memorize the shape of safety. A soft creak broke the silence. Tom peeked out, no taller than the saddle he was supposed to fetch, 6 years old, wild blonde hair, and a permanent streak of dirt on his cheek. He blinked at her. "You ain't a ghost," he said. Ellie smiled. "Not today." "You're new." "Looks like it." "I was new once too, then I stayed." He stepped out, dragging a coiled lead rope behind him. "Mr. Boone lets me live here. He's not my pa or anything. He just found me in town when I didn't have nowhere to go." She crouched down to his height. "He take good care of you?" "Yep. Better than the sheriff ever did. And he taught me how to whistle with grass." He handed her a blade of tall grass and showed her, though his whistle came out more like a breathy squeak. They spent the next hour in the yard. Tom showed her how to collect eggs without getting pecked. Ellie showed him how to braid a rope. When a hen fluttered out of the coop and startled them both, they laughed until their sides hurt. Later, Ellie carried a small basket of vegetables back to the kitchen. She rinsed them in a basin, sleeves rolled up, arms dusted with flour and dirt. Her body moved on muscle memory. It felt like a life she had almost forgotten. Inside, Silas was already seated at the table. Tom hopped up beside him with a thud. Ellie paused at the doorway, unsure whether to sit. Silas nodded once toward the empty chair, so she took it. Breakfast was simple: warm oats, a slice of dry cornbread, black coffee. Ellie noticed the details: the spoon set neatly at her side, the napkin folded without creases. She whispered, "Thank you for yesterday." Silas didn't look at her. "You needed help. That's not always enough reason for people to give it." He didn't answer. They ate in silence, the kind that wasn't cold, just careful. Tom hummed while kicking his heels against the chair leg. After breakfast, Silas went out back. Tom followed, dragging a wooden stick and declaring it a sword. Ellie stayed behind to clear the dishes. As she rinsed a bowl, her voice slipped into the quiet. "I'm 18, she said. Her back was to the room, but she knew she wasn't alone. "Not that it means much. My father always said I was just old enough to be useful." She paused. Her hands stayed underwater. He drank most days, gambled the rest. Lost more than money. He lost whatever kindness he had left. A plate clinked gently in the tin sink. When the debts stacked too high, he traded me to a saloon man, called it marriage, but it wasn't. Man was twice my age, maybe more, always smelled like blood and whiskey. She swallowed. "The night before, I took the ring, a few coins. I ran." Her voice dropped. "They've been after me since." The dish slipped in her grip, then steadied. Behind her, the sound of a chair scraping back. A quiet step. Silas appeared beside her, took a towel, and began drying the plates. He said nothing. She didn't look at him, but her voice softened. "I didn't think I'd make it past the train. Then you—" She trailed off. Silas folded the towel with practiced hands. Outside, Tom shouted something about sword fighting a cactus. His voice echoed across the yard. Ellie turned toward the window. And for the first time in days, she laughed. Not forced, not polite. Just laughed. Silas looked at her. Something in his eyes shifted. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it in a long, long time. The days passed without incident, and with them came the slow settling of silence that no longer felt like tension, but something closer to peace. Ellie fell into the rhythm of the ranch, as if she'd always belonged. Mornings began with the soft creak of floorboards and the smell of damp earth. She swept the porch, fetched water in small pails, folded laundry, warmed by the Sunday at noon. She chopped vegetables for stew or mended Tom's shirts where the elbows had frayed from too many imaginary sword fights with fence posts. Silas, true to his nature, remained quiet, moving through each day like part of the land itself, reliable, solid, unspoken. He repaired the corral post by post, patched the barn roof without fuss, and cleaned his tools with the same care he gave to saddles and silence. Their words were few, but something was beginning to fill the space between them, something slower than speech and softer than certainty. One afternoon, the light had turned amber and long shadows stretched across the pasture. Ellie wandered to the fence line, her skirts catching in the weeds, her fingertips brushing over the wild grasses. There, nestled between two rocks, she spotted a small bloom, a single wildflower with pale yellow petals and a trembling stem. It looked out of place, fragile, in the dry soil, but it stood. She plucked it gently and carried it back toward the house. Without a word, she placed it on the wooden step outside the front door. Nothing grand, nothing wrapped, just the bloom resting against sun-bleached grain. That evening, Silas found it. He stood for a long moment at the top of the stairs, staring down at the flower as if it had no business surviving here. Then he picked it up, almost reluctantly, and disappeared into the house. Later, when Ellie passed the small writing desk tucked in the corner of the main room, she noticed his old leather-bound notebook left open on the edge. Pressed neatly between 2 pages was the wildflower, flattened but carefully placed. She said nothing. The next day, when Ellie walked by the stable on her way to bring in the wash, she noticed a change in her usual resting spot, the flat stone beside the paddock, where she often sat after chores. A folded piece of oiled hide had been laid across the stone like a cushion, and beside it sat a wooden cup filled with cool water, the rim still beaded with condensation. She paused, one hand on the laundry basket, and smiled. There were no names attached, no notes, no explanations, but the message was as clear as if it had been carved in oak. She sat for a while that afternoon, sipping the water, eyes watching the sky. That evening, as dusk crept across the porch and the scent of stew filled the kitchen, Ellie finished sewing the patch on Tom's shirt while Silas quietly rehinged the gate that had been sagging all week. At dinner, without fanfare, Silas reached for the pot and ladled soup into her bowl first. Tom didn't notice, busy recounting how he had seen a hawk, the size of a bear, in the field. But Ellie did. She didn't speak of it, but the gesture curled warm inside her chest. Later that night, the wind picked up suddenly, rustling the shutters and whispering through the cracks in the cabin walls. Ellie, already in her room, heard footsteps outside her window. She peeked through the curtain. Silas was standing on the back stoop, securing the window latch with a length of rope. He tied it off with a neat knot, tugged it twice to check, and walked away. He never knocked, never said a word. Ellie returned to her bed, pulled the thin blanket tighter, and let the wind slide past her without worry. Lying in the dark, her thoughts drifted. He doesn't speak much, she thought, but everything he does feels like a sentence he never got to say out loud. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand the language. The morning began like any other. Sunlight crept over the ridge, lighting the edge of the fence posts in gold. Ellie was hanging laundry behind the house, the sleeves of Tom's shirts dancing in the breeze. She hummed softly, a tune she could no longer name, while Tom chased a butterfly through the grass, laughing and stumbling over his own feet. Silas was by the well, repairing a broken pulley. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with dirt and sweat. Ellie glanced over her shoulder, about to call out. Then she froze. A plume of dust was rising beyond the hills, not the kind stirred by cattle or breeze. It was fast, low, deliberate. Smoke. And beneath it, figures on horseback. 3 of them. As they crested the hill, the world seemed to narrow. Ellie's blood turned cold. Her body moved before her mind caught up. "Silas!" she shouted, voice sharp. He stood and followed her gaze. The riders were closing in. It only took a heartbeat for him to understand. He dropped the rope, crossed the yard in wide strides, and grabbed Ellie by the wrist. "Get inside, take Tom." But Tom was already running toward them, confused. "Who's that? Are they friends?" "No," Ellie said, scooping him into her arms. "No, baby. Inside." They barely made it through the door before the first man reached the porch. The second wasn't far behind. The third dismounted near the barn and disappeared from view. The house shook as the door slammed shut. Silas pushed a cabinet in front of it and reached for the rifle leaning by the wall. "You remember what I taught you?" he said to Ellie, eyes locked. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Stay low, stay calm." The door burst open. Wood splintered. One of the men, burly, sweat-soaked, eyes red with rage, charged in. Silas didn't hesitate. He drove his shoulder into the man's gut, sending him crashing into the table. Ellie grabbed Tom and ducked behind the stove, shielding the boy with her body. The second man kicked in the back entrance. He grabbed at Ellie's skirt, snarling, but she flung a pot at his head, catching him square in the jaw. Silas turned, landing a punch that sent the attacker staggering into the wall. The house rang with noise, grunts, wood cracking, glass shattering. Then, a scream. Not Ellie. Tom. The third man had crept in through the barn, circled around, and now stood in the kitchen doorway. His arm was wrapped around Tom's tiny chest, the blade of a hunting knife pressed against the boy's throat. Everything stopped. "Step back," the man growled. "Drop it, or I'll spill the brat like a pig." Silas froze. Ellie's breath caught. Tom's eyes were wide, brimming with silent tears. Silas raised his hand slowly, the rifle slipping from his grip. "Don't hurt him," he said. "You don't want to do that." The man sneered. "I want the girl. She's got something that ain't hers, and I'm gonna take it back." "You'll get nothing if you touch the boy." The man's grin widened. "Then be a good hero, Cowboy. Come take him back." Silas took a step forward, slow, deliberate. His voice softened. "Let him go. You're not leaving here if you don't." The man spat. "Neither are you." And just as Silas reached the edge of the table, hands still raised, the third man swung the butt of his knife hard. Crack. The blow landed square at Silas's temple. He dropped like a felled tree, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Ellie screamed. Tom cried out. The knife dropped. Silas didn't move. His body lay still beside the hearth, blood beginning to pool beneath his cheek. The sound of Silas's body hitting the floor seemed to split the air in two. Ellie's scream tore through the room, raw and helpless. Tom kicked and squirmed in the outlaw's grip, his small hands clawing against the man's arm, but the knife was already raised again. Ellie's eyes darted frantically across the kitchen. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat louder than the last, until her gaze landed on the old hunting rifle propped by the fireplace. She moved before she thought. Her hands shook violently as she seized it, the weight nearly toppling her. The stock was worn smooth, the barrel cold. Her knees buckled, but she planted her feet. She could hear her own breath rasping, hear the outlaw's curse as he turned toward her. "Put that down, girl," he snarled. "Or the boy dies first." Ellie's lips trembled, but her voice came out steady enough to surprise even herself. "Let him go, now." The door behind her creaked, and suddenly another presence filled the room. Old Raoul, the ranch hand who had worked these fields since before Silas was grown, stepped inside with a shotgun cradled in his arms. His hair was gray and thin, his shoulders stooped, but his eyes burned like embers. "Best do as she says," Raoul growled. The room tensed, a taut string about to snap. Ellie raised the rifle higher, though her arms quivered beneath the strain. Her finger brushed the trigger. The outlaw holding Tom sneered. "You wouldn't dare." Ellie swallowed, the barrel swaying. "Try me." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Raoul lifted his shotgun to the ceiling and fired. The explosion shook the rafters, dust cascading from the beams. The thunder of it rattled the dishes, and the outlaws flinched instinctively, eyes darting. "Next one ain't for the roof," Raoul barked. Ellie drew in a ragged breath, braced the rifle against her shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked, deafening. The bullet grazed the outlaw's shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. He howled, dropping Tom in shock. Tom scrambled across the floor and clung to Raoul's leg, sobbing. Ellie staggered back from the recoil, her arms burning, but she didn't drop the weapon. Her chest rose and fell with desperate fury, tears streaking her dust-smeared cheeks. She kept the barrel leveled, even as her body shook. The outlaws glanced at each other, the sudden certainty in their eyes beginning to falter. One of them cursed, clutching the bleeding man by the arm. "She's crazy, let's go." Another shot from Raoul split the air, this one grazing the porch as the men scrambled for the door. They stumbled into the yard, dragging their wounded comrade with them, spitting curses over their shoulders but not daring to come back. The sound of hooves pounded into the distance. And then, silence. Ellie's grip slackened. The rifle slipped from her hands and clattered onto the floorboards. She collapsed to her knees beside Silas, whose still form lay sprawled on the kitchen planks, blood dark against the wood. "Silas," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Please, wake up, please." No answer. Her tears dropped onto his shirt as her hands fumbled against his cheek, his chest, searching for any sign. "Don't you leave me," she begged, voice cracking. "You don't get to leave me after everything. Do you hear me?" A faint groan stirred from his throat. His body shifted, only barely, but it was enough. Ellie gasped with relief, clutching his hand in both of hers. Her heart thudded so wildly it drowned out the ringing in her ears. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering broken prayers and promises all at once. Tom sobbed into Raoul's coat, the old man rubbing his back with trembling hands. And Ellie, for the first time since she had run from the world, realized she wasn't running anymore. She was standing. Frightened, yes, her whole body shook with it, but still standing, because someone she loved had fallen, and she had lifted the gun. The ranch fell into a hush after the chaos. The broken door was patched with rough boards. The yard still bore the marks of hooves and scuffle, but inside the house the world had narrowed to a single room, a single bed, and the man who lay within it. Silas had not stirred much since the blow to his head. His breaths came slow, shallow at times, and Ellie counted each one as if the next might not come. She stayed by his side. She changed the damp cloth on his brow whenever it cooled. She coaxed water past his lips with a steady hand, her voice soft with words he could not quite hear. When Raoul brought broth from the stove, she lifted the spoon carefully, pressing it to his mouth, whispering encouragement until he swallowed. Tom sat on the floor nearby, drawing with charcoal on scraps of paper, glancing up now and then with worried eyes. Ellie would smile at him, though her own face was pale from sleepless nights. Days passed this way, measured not by the sun or chores but by small victories, the twitch of a hand, a faint murmur, the flicker of his eye.